The Poles have warmed to Gorbachev. They've never seen a Kremlin leader like this before. This woman told him, "We'll work together for peace throughout the world."
The Warsaw Pact will now consider asymmetric reductions of its superior conventional force and equipment levels. But the likelihood of Soviet barracks being emptied of troops and equipment in the near future is minimal. There remains no great optimism here that these children will live in a more prosperous and politically pluralist Poland. Poland's creaking state system is under assault from free enterprise. In the kitchen of her typically tiny apartment, Małgosia Tarnowski takes telephone calls from the sick, asking for freelance doctors to visit them at home. Husband Peter matches up the phone requests with the names of 80 specialist doctors who for a fee are providing a service which the under-resourced, overstretched state health service cannot provide. Peter has no medical training. He used to run a small gardening business. But his adverts on television and the enormous public response show his instinct for providing a new fee-paying service which exasperated better-off Poles desperately want.
I think the main reason people use us is because our services are better. We have better specialists, highly qualified doctors, and they can spend more time with the patients. They visit the patients at home, so they get help the same day.
The capitalist formula is simple. Poles who can afford it get a service they want. The Tarnowskis make good money, and so do badly paid doctors like orthopedic specialist Maciek Brodowski, who in his free time can theoretically earn in 2 days as much as he earns in a month at the state hospital, where he still works full-time.
The main problem is we have not enough money for equipment, for staff. So patient has to wait a long time for admission to hospital, except emergency calls.
When you visit a patient in the home, do they get better treatment than in a hospital here?
Sometimes, because we have time, we can sit, I can talk with patient half hour. Nobody's waiting for me. Just in hospital, I have short time.
It's a savage indictment of the central principle of communism that the state should guarantee jobs and provide vital services like healthcare free to everyone, but it doesn't. Poland's centralized system, created under Stalin and based on heavy industry, is on the point of economic and political bankruptcy. Now, prompted by the Gorbachev reforms in the Soviet Union, the party and government are at long last trying to confront the reality of years of failing to deliver on the promises of communism. The government wants personal initiative in the state and private sector to supply what central planning has conspicuously failed to provide.
People just begin to get used to the operation in the new system, in this decentralized system of individual decision makers, rather than in the previously prevailing highly centralized economy.
The problem is that most Poles simply don't believe the government's new talk of economic reform will ever produce improvements. There's a credibility crisis, the atmosphere one of deep despair and political indifference. 6 years of government promises of economic reform have yet to abolish rationing and have merely exacerbated an already appalling economic situation. They've produced massive price rises, 60% inflation, and a hodgepodge of new ideas and regulations which have yet to produce anything. The new buzz from the government is that everyone should have the chance to set up in business, but Josef Taran knows the bureaucratic reality. He was once a leading figure in student solidarity and interned under martial law. For 6 months, he's been working through the mass of existing legislation in the hope of registering as a limited liability company, which will do a variety of activities, from construction and marketing health foods to selling computer software and hardware.
Many obstacles for the young managers who would like to start the economic activity are still valid, are still actual. The promises of the people connected with the government, with the process of the economic reform in Poland, are still promises.
Lech Jaruzelski resigned from the diplomatic service 5 years ago. He faced enormous problems setting up a small light engineering workshop in a rented cabin at the bottom of someone's garden. He says the state system, while keen to buy his competitively priced products, does little to help him.
For many years, the system has worked against private business here. There is discrimination in terms of granting credits, in terms of supplying materials, supplying tools, making it possible for you to buy machinery.
So it's been an uphill struggle, but he's begun supplying parts to a British company. With the promise of new orders as a vote of confidence, he's been negotiating this week to expand into a larger workshop, where he'll invest in new equipment. He'll be further helped if the government stands by its promises and stops tinkering with the law every few months.
We would like to see a stabilized tax policy and stabilized law to be sure that what we have invested will be worthwhile in the future and will bring us profit 5, 10, 15 years from now.
But extraordinary things are beginning to happen. At banks, people can now exchange their Polish złotys for coupons which have a face value in dollars. And the banks are effectively legalizing the black market by selling the bonds at the black market rate. This dollar bond is being seen as the Polish government admitting that the official currency here is becoming increasingly worthless, that while the Polish złoty buys so little, the American dollar buys so much more. And this bond is also being seen as one step away from the American dollar itself becoming an official Polish currency. Giving Poles the chance to buy for dollars Polish goods like television sets and cars, which are rarely available for złotys, is a significant step. It may begin to defuse public despair that the government simply won't come to terms with the realities of life here. One other reality is that most Poles continue to have no faith in the Communist Party, in whose name Poland is run. The banned trade union Solidarity remains a moving spirit, but is said to be disorganized. The government continue to call it irrelevant. But in the last 10 days, there are signs that the revamped Polish leadership may at last be searching for common ground with the opposition, a so-called anti-crisis pact.
There are discussions between people from my party and from the opposition, but till now they are on the stage of discussions, you know, no more.
Is it a root, a seed of optimism that this is going to be the way to bring forward economic reform?
Yes, but nobody will achieve such a situation in the future that everyone will be ready to accept our view or our position, and also we are not ready to accept every idea, every concept which is proposed by.
Poland's leadership is taking its cue from Mr. Gorbachev. But there remains no great optimism here that these children will live in a more prosperous and politically pluralist Poland. Nick Gowing, ITN, in Warsaw.
It's a short flight from Moscow to Warsaw, but there's a historic suspicion in Poland of the Kremlin, and Mr. Gorbachev had come to change that. Poland's General Jaruzelski is clinging to Gorbachev's political and economic reforms. The perestroika era is pressing changes across Eastern Europe, with communism's new leaders setting the pace. Within minutes, Gorbachev was among ordinary Poles. His message, the Soviet Union's paternalism towards Eastern Europe was over. And in the Polish parliament, he launched new arms control ideas for Europe. He wanted to withdraw frontline Soviet fighters from Eastern Europe if NATO dropped plans to switch 72 F-16s to bases in Italy. A European study centre for avoiding future wars, and a European summit to break what he called the vicious circle of conventional troop levels. Then Mr. Gorbachev turned to history. Many here hoped he'd diffuse a major controversy and acknowledge Soviet forces massacred 4,000 Polish officers at Katyn in World War II. The crime was blamed by Stalin on the Nazis, but few Poles believed that. Mr. Gorbachev said, "There are difficult moments, what we call blank spots in our history. There's only one way to the truth. Investigate the facts, compare points of view. History can't be changed, but conclusions can." So it's been left to a commission of historians to decide, but Mr. Gorbachev's grasp of European history has selected this Warsaw Pact capital to air new arms control initiatives. They're being studied in NATO capitals tonight, but the fighter deal's likely to win scant support. Ian Glover-James, News at 10, Warsaw. High in Poland's Tatra Mountains, Mr. Gorbachev's relentless charming of his Polish neighbours threatened the rhythm of a mountain serenade. The Poles have warmed to Gorbachev. Despite age-old suspicions of Soviet power, they've never seen a Kremlin leader like this before. He was heading for the wooden house where Lenin spent 2 summers in exile from Tsarist Russia, plotting the revolution that gave birth to communist power. Lenin loved this spot, but in 1914 was arrested and deported to Switzerland. The Poles thought he was spying for Russia. Mr. Gorbachev likes linking his name to Lenin. It gives him scope to attack the darker years of Soviet history. He told local people, if Poland and the Soviet Union develop on the road to socialism, that will be good for all Europe. What do you think? And this woman told him, we'll work together for peace throughout the world. The Poles are impressed with what Gorbachev's done in his country and with his friendly style. The crowds out to see him are small, but this mountain welcome for Gorbachev was genuine. Ian Glover-James, ITN, in Poland.
The courtyard of the Wawel Castle in the old Polish capital of Krakow. In the front row, Mikhail Gorbachev and the Polish leader, General Jaruzelski, lap up Polish satire on the Gorbachev reforms.
Perestroika.
This song caused raised official eyebrows a year ago, but when General Jaruzelski sent a copy to Mr. Gorbachev, the Soviet leader loved it. As he did last night, despite the touch irreverent spirit and the upside-down red star on the hat.
Żeby stwierdzić niezbicie, wieje wiosna, wieje ze wschodu, nowy sposób na życie. Wieje wiosna, a wiosną żyje się zdrowiej. Może skończą się pozory i haseł pustosłowie. Михаил, настоящий ты герой, когда-то в красной рубашоночке, хорошенькой такой. И жена тоже есть красавица, прекрасная Раиса, так в тебе и влюблена. Ой, мама, пати, новой революции победит Михаил. Ой.
If images and body language tell the story, then Mr. Gorbachev may have begun reversing his somewhat distant image, which at the start of this trip failed to convince the majority of cynical Poles. He balked at trying on the singer's wing collar, but his spontaneity, here slipping on his shoes after a hard day, has made an impression on the millions of Polish skeptics, to whom Soviet leaders are epitomized by Brezhnev and Stalin. Here in the home of the Polish Pope, children light-heartedly awarded him their Order of the Smile, and the audience feted him like the winner of a presidential election. A parrot and organ grinder greet Mr. Gorbachev. As the Soviet leader walked arm in arm with Raisa through Old Warsaw tonight, the Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu was being greeted in advance of tomorrow's Warsaw Pact meeting. It ended rumours that his rift with Hungary over Transylvania would keep him away. Soviet bloc sources are suggesting new initiatives at the meeting. This summit takes place against a background of increasing speculation backed by American intelligence that the Soviets are preparing to withdraw some or all of their 65,000 troops from Hungary. It's speculation heightened by the words of a senior Hungarian official that the Red Army troops could go in the foreseeable future. And 6 days ago in Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Prime Minister Nikolai Ryzhkov talked of withdrawing all Soviet armed forces from foreign lands by the year 2000. Such a possibility of Soviet troops going has raised great interest, but the likelihood of Soviet barracks like this one outside Warsaw being emptied of troops and equipment in the near future is minimal. Having raised the possibility, senior Soviet officials now say their military personnel won't go until foreign troops like those from America and Britain are withdrawn from European soil.
We are ready to withdraw all our forces into the Soviet Union, if and when another side will agree to do the same. But we have no reply, positive reply on our proposal.
There can be no situation where we change the structure, reduce our armed forces, change their deployment, while the West does nothing and even builds up its armaments.
So, when the Warsaw Pact leaders assemble tomorrow in the Radziwiłł Palace, sources suggest they'll formalize and perhaps modify a little the ideas on conventional force reductions and a revised military doctrine presented by Mr. Gorbachev to President Reagan at the Moscow summit 6 weeks ago. Ideas received distinctly coolly by the Americans. The Warsaw Pact proposal is expected to have 3 stages. First, a full exchange of military data, which will allow the Warsaw Pact and NATO to eliminate imbalances and asymmetries. Second, both sides cut force levels by 500,000 troops each. Thirdly, a strictly defensive character is given to the forces of both sides. In addition, Mr. Gorbachev's 2 initiatives to the Polish Parliament on Monday are expected to be formalized, despite their rejection by most NATO governments. First, the idea that NATO cancel redeployment of 72 American F-16 fighters from Spain to Italy, in return for the Warsaw Pact withdrawing a similar number of its frontline fighters. Secondly, in order to give conventional force negotiations a new impetus, the Kremlin still wants a summit of European leaders, plus America and Canada.
If you want to settle really very important questions, you need summits.
The West suggests that such a summit is really nothing more than a distraction from negotiations which, despite difficulties, are well underway.
No, we want to help this process, not to distract it.
The West is heartened that the Warsaw Pact will now consider asymmetric reductions of its superior conventional force and equipment levels. But what may still threaten progress in Vienna is continuing Soviet unwillingness to make parallel concessions on human rights.
You can't compare reduction of conventional weapons with enlarging the exit quotas of people of Jewish origin. This is a purely artificial link.
But with Kremlin talk of changing Soviet bloc military doctrine, there are small pointers to real change. Yesterday, Poland announced that conscientious objectors can now avoid military service and do civilian work, and Polish soldiers will no longer have to pledge allegiance to Soviet forces. Military matters, though, were far from Mr. Gorbachev's mind today. In the royal castle, he was hearing the thoughts of 300 Polish intellectuals. While some were able to air their views, other more radical thinkers were pointedly excluded altogether.
Gorbachev is speaking with the right people, and Jaruzelski, the right intellectuals, and Jaruzelski is not speaking with the right intellectuals. A lot of my friends, eminent Polish colleagues, were not invited here at all.
This was a very optimistic meeting, which will provide the impetus for further democratization of life in our country.
And Gorbachev himself is an example that it is possible, that you can do something in the frames of this system.
He is only as a symbol of the organization, as a symbol is a very good symbol, but the organization is the other thing.
And that organization is the communist system. After all the pictures of a smiling Soviet leader, in the end, it's the message Mr. Gorbachev gave behind closed doors to party leaders today, which will decide the way ahead for Poland's reforms. Nick Gowing, ITN, in Warsaw.